Good afternoon and welcome to Dialogue with Deidre. I'm your host, Deidre Malone. I am so glad to be in the studio today. I know we were not in the studio on Monday. It was a holiday, and hopefully a lot of you were out there resting on Labor Day. And a lot of you were out in the streets protesting, asking for $15 for increase. And I support that movement. I hate I could not have been out there with you, but you know that I'm there in spirit, and whatever I can do to help, I will do. I am excited to have someone in the studio with me today that I have admired for a long time. I consider him a great friend and a heck of a writer, okay? Tom Jones is the author of the Smart City Memphis blog. Tom, welcome to Dialogue with Deidre.
It's a pleasure to be here, Deidre. Good to see you.
Good to see you. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Running in different directions to
I know.
The joys of small business ownership.
I know, and the heartache, right? The heartache, but it's all worth it.
Monday was a holiday.
For some people, when you're a small business owner,
great.
you have to work, right?
Yes, I'm well aware.
So, Tom, talk to me about the Smart City Memphis blog. It has been around a while, and a lot of the articles that you pen are so thought-provoking. We have a mutual friend who sends them out all the time, Gail Jones Carson, to her database. Exactly.
I think she's got a bigger distribution than I do.
I think she has a bigger distribution than the Commercial Appeal. Okay? So, talk to me about what was the impetus of starting Smart City?
Well, it was 12 years ago. And Carol Collette and I were working in the same space, and Carol had several people working for her, and I was working out of that office because I'd always wanted to be near her because she's so smart.
She is smart.
And every morning we spent about an hour just sort of decompressing from whatever the news was and talking about the news. And so one day she said, why don't we just write a blog instead of talking to each other about this all day long? And that's how it started. And so it's been 12 years.
Wow.
I think often of my wife, who once said, you ought to write a book. And I said, I don't have the time to write a book or enough to write about. And I've now written probably 3 million words over 12 years, 3,500 blog posts.
Oh, my goodness.
On just whatever strikes my fancy that day.
But let me just say, it's always engaging as someone who used to serve on the Edge board. When you would talk about Edge, I would read it intently saying, now that's a different perspective. And that's one that, as someone who was serving at the time, I didn't look at it that way. I didn't look at it as, the incentives are basically, giving away tax dollars that could potentially go towards education but your perspective was one that I thought about when I was there voting.
Well, I'm glad one member did. Thanks, teacher.
And I would ask all the tough questions, Tom. I would. I was, Tom's perspective is a really good one.
Yeah, it's just, that's sort of been a persistent theme for 12 years. I know that people are probably tired of me writing about it, but I just worry that the tax freezes are now entitlements.
Mm-hmm.
And when it becomes entitlement, now we're expanding them. Now they're into apartments, and thank God they've finally gotten into some neighborhood
which is
focus.
Good.
Yeah, and just wish that there was lots more money being spent on that. But it just seems like when you're waiving, roughly $70 million a year in city and county taxes, you need to be very thoughtful. And I'm sure you were on the board and made sure they always ask the question, do you really need this, or did they just factor this in now because they know they can get it?
One thing that I would focus on would be the time period in terms of, you have a certain period of time to make sure that you, hire those individuals that you say you're going to hire, at the salaries that you say that you're going to hire them at, to ensure that those tax dollars at some level are coming back into the community. And, there were those of us who were big on during the audit, and, it would be a random audit, saying, we're going to claw this back because you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And I felt like we needed to do more of that. And I'm hopeful. I've not really paid close attention to it now, but I'm hopeful that that they are paying more attention to it and they're doing more of that.
Well, and I think when you were there, they changed some of the wage thresholds too.
They did.
Because when I first started writing the blog, I mean, tax freezes were pre-edge.
Right.
Were being given to companies who paid so little that the employees could then have to go get medical care at the what was the med back then, and could apply for welfare. I mean, it was just made no sense. Where was the public purpose in that was essentially the question.
And we did. When I was there, we did change that wage because people need a living wage. That's important. Even though, when I was a legislator, we voted in support of one, and then, of course, the state came and rained down and said, you don't have that authority.
Yeah, those people that say that federal government's always in their business
Exactly.
have no hesitancy about getting in local government's business.
I don't understand it, Tom, but that's the reason we need to pay attention to who we elect.
Yeah, at least be consistent. Don't be a hypocrite.
Exactly. Now, that's our point of view. Let's talk about, we know that next year is a big year for Memphis. We will be celebrating 50 years, MLK 50. It's a big, big campaign that's going on across the city. National Civil Rights Museum, Wendy Thomas and others are writing about it. And you wrote a very thoughtful piece on the injustice of a Memphis economy built on low-wage jobs. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I give Wendy a lot of credit for having some angles on stories that escape a lot of us.
Yes.
And Wendy had called one time and said, "Can you tell or write about where the roots of all this began?" Mm-hmm. I wrote a subsequent article and found out the roots really began in, the 1800s. But what I did for this article was I tracked it back to like 1900, and even in 1900. What would become the Chamber of Commerce said that the competitive advantage that Memphis had, and they said it this way, our advantage is the Negro, and that we have no race problems at all. Well, considering that in that time period they were putting up Nathan Bedford Forrest statues, I'm not sure if they were especially in tune for whatever the race issues were. But one of the themes that go through a lot of the blog posts that I write is to fight this notion that somehow Memphis is just a victim of forces beyond our control.
Right.
It is exactly who we are based on the decisions we made.
Right.
I was thinking Daryl Cobbins sent me a quote once when we were working on something, and I use it all the time now, is every system is perfectly designed to create exactly the results it creates. Mm-hmm. So the low-wage jobs in Memphis didn't just happen. There were choices made, and the choices were made all the way back to the 1900s that we would sell Memphis at a discount. We would sell it on the cheap. And you look at cities that are highly competitive now and are really successful, are selling themselves on quality and investments in quality of life, research, education. And so early on, we decided we would compete with the cheap cities instead of the high-performing cities. And I even tracked that back to the jobs conference.
How long ago was that?
1980s.
Mm-hmm.
Early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And all the intentions were good, that we were going to set up the economy for the future, but then we essentially chose paths like logistics and tourism and agriculture that were low wage.
Right.
And so we didn't make the shift that I think some of the speakers wanted to make, which was more toward technology. And research. And so we just keep doubling down, it seems to me. And anyway, that was the sense of that article. I had used David Sissel and Michael Honey.
David's over at the University of Memphis, economist there, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Honey has written a book about, coincidentally, about Martin Luther King and Memphis in those last days, and they had made the point that where the jobs growth was taking place in Memphis continues to take place in low-wage jobs, and that some of them are not worth having. I mean, they were very strong about it. We're just sort of settling for whatever.
Right.
And so my question has always been, if we continue on this path, who ultimately are we competing with? Are we competing with third world nations?
Right.
Are we competing with Mexico? And I don't know that we can out-cheap those countries.
Right.
And so that's always been my concern.
So with that, you're giving us a whole lot to think about, because you're absolutely right. When you think about the types of businesses that we have here in Memphis, a lot of them are manufacturing businesses, and they're low wage. When you think about technology or research, you think about St. Jude, which is an internationally renowned research hospital.
Right.
But there are very few, of those.
Yeah.
We have one here. When you think about technology, who do you think about here in Memphis?
Mm-hmm.
Really, not many industries.
Yeah.
And so I would always say, and I think this is the job of the chamber, is, we want to bring companies here, but we want to also have a workforce that's prepared. When you think about what was Electrolux that we brought in and we gave, incentives to, they hired a whole lot of people. They brought a whole lot of people in, and they came back afterwards and said that the workforce was not prepared for the jobs that they had to offer.
Yep.
Well, I'm thinking, if you have a strategic plan, Chamber of Commerce, the industries that you want to recruit, if they're technology-based, and I think they should be, then why not work with the colleges and universities to prepare the workforce for those jobs that we want to recruit to our community? I think that would go a long way, Tom, in kind of helping turn this around.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And in some ways, Deidre, I'm like a ex-smoker who's now a smoking fanatic, anti-smoking fanatic. I was involved in setting up the matrix for the pilot program. And so I remember the rationale, and it was that we will do this in the short term because we have a workforce issue, but over time we'll correct that workforce issue and we won't have to do this anymore. Well, that's been almost 30 years now.
Right.
And we're still talking about the workforce issues. And so sometimes it makes the really cynical among us think, who benefits from never fixing the workforce?
Yeah.
And, same people that benefited by setting the agenda for the jobs conference. And so you just wonder, why are we still today? I mean, every administration seems to wrestle with, let's fix workforce investment. And finally, it seems to be on the right track. But we've been wrestling with this for 25 years while saying that's the reason we have to give out so many tax freezes, more than all the other cities in Tennessee combined.
Right.
And it's hard to find a city that's doing what we're doing still. And so you're absolutely right. It's workforce.
So Tom, do you think people, just the average citizen, they've not grasped that yet? I mean, because there has to be a way to force industry and the elected officials to do what we know they need to do in terms of trying to create opportunities for good paying jobs, and bringing those types of industries to Memphis and Shelby County. I mean, what do you think we need to do? I mean, I know you're doing your part in terms of raising awareness through your writing and the blogs, but just from a grassroots standpoint, what do you think could be done?
I think it's maybe starting to happen, Deidre.
Okay.
But I think the grassroots has to just say, this isn't acceptable.
Yeah.
And we realize we're the people that are paying the price, and we're not going to take this anymore. Because it just seems to kind of float along and never gets addressed. I remember in the jobs conference, one of the numbers that one of the economists pointed out was that the African American household income in Memphis was half the white household income.
Mm-hmm.
It is today.
Right.
And you think, this is just not, it's not just a question of it's not moral, it's not proper, it's not good, it's stupid business.
Right, right.
You think about where the greatest economic, at least in my mind, where you think the greatest economic impact and priority for Memphis is it's to try to increase the average income for people of color. If that alone is a $20 billion to the benefit of
Right.
Memphis, if it can be done. And so that's why I applaud City of Memphis for what they're doing with minority business. I applaud First Tennessee Banks, very serious about diversity inclusion.
Methodist Healthcare is too.
Yeah.
They're doing a great job.
And so it's good to see the political leadership, but it's really good to see the private leadership say this matters to us too. And I keep thinking that somehow Memphis is a laboratory for the nation if we were able to position this right.
If we get it right.
We were diverse long before diverse was cool.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, we were the first, and I think only Washington has crossed the threshold now. We're the first majority African American metro in the history of the country. And you think in 2042 the country will not have a majority race. And that Shelby County will be 70% people of color.
Right.
We have a chance to prove how you can change the conventional wisdom.
And do it well.
Yeah, and the people that say, well, especially these days, coming out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, Attorney General's Office, I just heard him on the radio talking about non-Native Americans, and you're just thinking,
Oh my goodness.
you know, is this 1950?
Right.
But somehow maybe Memphis can be a laboratory for the nation and show how diversity really is an economic powerhouse. And it isn't just, if you've got a diverse community, you're destined to just have low-wage jobs.
I think sometimes citizens don't realize the power that they have.
Right.
The power of the vote is so powerful. I mean, and the power of, if you're working for an organization and you're in leadership at some capacity, you have a voice as well. And sometimes we don't use it. Sometimes we sit there and I'm just glad to be there.
Yeah.
And we need to do better, Tom.
Yeah. And well, you've been on the other end as an elected official. You know, you get 20 calls on something, it feels like a groundswell.
It does. It's like, I need to pay attention.
So for neighborhoods to organize and say, this is not good enough.
Right.
And you know, that's in the pilot program and in so many things, I always feel like there's this it's good enough for Memphis attitude in it. And I have made people swear off Nashville comparisons on the blog. Because
They do it all the time, though.
Because no city in the Southeast, and these days almost in the whole country, can compete with what Nashville's doing.
Yeah.
But Nashville invested. You know, I remember when they were building a main library, and they said, how do we build the best library in the country?
Right.
How do we have the best park system in the country? And, you know, we build buildings like the Pyramid, and we were proud that we were building it cheaper than any other, and it showed.
Right.
And that's why it's now Bass Pro, I guess. So, you know, it's just a different, it feels like we've got to turn the mentality on its head, and that Memphis is a city worth fighting for and investing in.
So it's the visioning.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't envision ourselves being the best that we can be.
Yeah.
And when we think about these big major projects that can have such a large impact on the future of our economy, we're not doing the best job of envisioning it, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many meetings have you been in where somebody says, what Memphis needs is a vision?
Right.
And you think, you know, they're right.
You're absolutely right.
I know Mark Sturgis out at Seeding Success says the vision has to be child-focused, that every child should be prepared for career, college, life. And you think, well, yeah. It isn't about, what was it, John Kennedy said, greatness isn't about the height of your buildings or the width of your street.
That's
it's
right.
about how you treat
Exactly.
the poorest and the people in need among you.
That's right.
And so I think Mark's onto something. I think
think-
the vision is about kids.
I think Mark's absolutely right. One thing I love about, and I'm purely plugging my client Aspire Public Schools, is that they have a policy that they envision every child is going to college.
Yeah.
And they are surrounded by, Harvard flags, Jackson State University flags. I mean, college is all what is a part of their DNA. And they want every student in their school to believe you can go to college and be successful and graduate and be great.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about, our children. All right, Tom, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back and we're going to finish our discussion. So glad to have Tom Jones on Dialogue with Deidre today. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. You're watching Dialogue with Deidre. Welcome back to Dialogue with Deidre. I'm your host, Deidre Malone. Tom Jones is in the studio with me. He is the author of the Smart City Memphis blog and an incredible writer, and we just love to read the blog, and his articles are thought-provoking. Tom, I'm so glad you're able to be on our show today.
It's a pleasure. Any excuse to get to see you.
I know.
Takes this to get us together.
I know, and it's way long overdue, let me just tell you, audience. A lot going on in our city.
Yep.
I know there's some who've been, for months now, talking about moving Nathan Bedford Forrest's monument as well as Jefferson Davis's monument. And it really heated up as of late with the advent of the rally in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Right.
And so it looks like the city of Memphis is moving forward with trying to push really hard to get the Tennessee Historical Commission to set as a part of an agenda the discussion on waiving and allowing the city of Memphis to move the monuments. Don't know yet whether or not they're going to be allowed to be on the agenda, but I know the city of Memphis is pushing hard, and it's my understanding from just reading some of the newspapers or seeing Governor Haslam that he has even asked that they put Memphis on the agenda. In light of everything that's going to happen here in our city next year with MLK 50. What are your thoughts on it, Tom?
Well, to the point about the Historical Commission, the cynic in me wonders if they're going to waltz Memphis until the legislature can get back in session.
And that's January.
And can pass something that makes it even harder, stricter, tougher
Right.
to do anything with these Confederate statues. It's nothing sort of short of reprehensible
Yes.
that they're still up. And it's very disconcerting for me to hear some of the arguments from Caucasians about why they should remain. The one about it's about heritage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, the heritage is hate.
Right.
No, it's the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery. it was fought over economics. Yes, economics that was built on slavery.
Slavery.
All roads take you back to the same place.
Right.
And I wrote a long history for Wendy Thomas over at MLK 50 on the history of the lost cause of the Confederacy in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
And Forrest's statue was part of a whole movement in the South to try to revise history. And
because didn't they fight? Was there a battle here in Memphis or close by, and the Confederacy lost?
Well, Memphis was so shortly lived in the Confederacy, it's barely worth mentioning. There was I love it because it sounds so grand, but the Battle of Memphis was on the Mississippi River.
Huh.
And it lasted about 2 hours. And the Union ships wiped out the Confederate ships. In fact, the Confederate Navy never again was even worth mentioning. People from Memphis gathered on the river bluffs, and it was like a carnival downtown watching this battle in the river. It lasted 2 hours, and the Union took Memphis.
Wow.
And so Memphis wasn't part of the Union, but it was managed by Union forces until the end of the Civil War. The second battle of Memphis was when Nathan Bedford Forrest rushed into town trying to capture some Union soldiers, and it lasted a few hours, and it failed too. And Ulysses S. Grant used to say about Memphis, he had never seen people so disloyal to their own cause because we traded and did business with anybody that would come down the river.
Still sounds like Memphis.
But you go back and you look at Jeff Davis was moved out of a cemetery and plopped down in a city park, and fundraising for a statue began around the Sons of Confederacy convention that was going to be in Memphis. And then Jeff Davis was a direct response to the civil rights movement.
So that was in the 60s, 50s, 60s?
The Jefferson Davis statue was erected 3 months before Martin Luther King received the Nobel Prize, and several months after Goodwin, Schwerner, and Cheney were murdered in Mississippi.
Stop.
This is the context in which this great man, I believe one of the backers said, and if you look at the names on the statue, they're some of Memphis's famous families. And so in 1964, at a time when, in all rights, the city should be standing up for what is right.
Exactly.
It's still looking backwards and saying, no, we're going to salute Jefferson Davis. And one of the justifications was that Memphis was one of the last southern cities that still did not have a statue. And he lived in Memphis after the Civil War and sold insurance for a while. But, there's no basis for that.
Right.
And the people that say, well, you can somehow tell, it tells history. No, it doesn't. It tells a version of history that isn't true.
Right. Because you would think you have these two statues here that, the Confederacy won Memphis.
Yeah.
That's what you would think.
Yeah, I used to go to spend every summer with Uncle and Aunt in Atlanta growing up, and every year I had to go to the cyclorama to see the Union atrocities of Atlanta and go out to Stone Mountain. And I used to say, it's going to kill my uncle when he finds out that the Confederacy didn't win that war. And that's sort of, you think about the culture that existed at that time. You have, in the 1920s, you had 15,000 Confederate veterans marching down the streets of Memphis. And the dichotomy between what could happen or what was allowed to happen on Beale Street and what was taking place in the city streets, the message wasn't lost, I'm sure, on anybody that was African American.
Right.
We'll let you have a street, stay on your street.
Stay on your street.
And the message was pretty clear. So it's hard for me remembering all the racism that was around me when I was growing up 20 miles from here. Not to take this kind of personally.
Yeah.
It's just time to say, no, all of that is a myth. And Gone with the Wind was a myth.
It was a myth.
Song of the South was a myth. Birth of the Nation, the first one, was a myth. You know, and somehow the neo-Confederates did such a good job of brainwashing everybody into thinking that this was some great, noble, what's the Gone with the Wind refers to them as the knights.
Right.
You know, so I just, you know, there is no context. Without context, it's nothing. Put them someplace.
Right.
You know, I'd love for Nathan Bedford Forrest to go back in a cemetery where he belongs.
Exactly.
But
he and his wife.
even Elmwood wouldn't want a statue that big, and they've got lots of gorgeous statues. And Jeff Davis, I don't know if at a time we could melt down all the cannons that were down in that park.
Yeah.
Melt down the statue. Just go for it. I know that's not what most people think.
I appreciate your comments. I was in a meeting, Tom, and there was a minister, white gentleman, and he talked about the fact that he said, more white people should speak up on this issue and really be the voice in terms of the movement of moving the statutes. And but you're seeing more and more people. They're diverse crowds at the rallies. They're diverse. And it's a beautiful thing to see white, black, Asian, Hispanic standing unified on the same issue, saying, move them. Most of them want them torn down. Move them to someplace appropriate, right? It is history, but put it somewhere where it's appropriate.
Yeah. I just don't know how people can defend it without, I'm thinking about Caucasians.
Right.
Can defend it without thinking, why am I defending this? What is really at the core of why I'm defending this? Is it because I feel like, there's too many people of color in this country, or that I'm losing control of the politics and whatever? It's just no way to justify that they even exist anymore.
I think that's a big part of it. In this environment, I tell people with the advent of our new president and some of the decisions he's making and some of the policies that he's turning back, I think more and more people are feeling empowered.
Yep.
I'm emboldened to say what they really think, outside of their homes. Whether you talk about it inside your house, you feel a little bit more comfortable saying it outside. And I think you're going to see more of that. That's the reason we need to figure out what's going to be the best way to find those commonalities and figure out how to work together and live together better instead of being divided, because we're all immigrants, quite frankly.
Yeah.
We are all immigrants in this country.
Some of us of our own free will.
Exactly.
But
Right.
We are all immigrants.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's. I think you're right, though. I think the current politics, and then sort of the anonymity of social media. I can say.
Oh gosh.
I hear things being said that would have shocked me in 1960, and it's just hard for me to believe people are really saying this. I only hope that it's sort of the death rattle of the last, racist group. But unfortunately, I was saying that of the generation ahead of mine. Right. If that generation will die, mine will fight. And then I see what mine are saying on social media, and you think.
And then younger.
Yeah.
Some of the young folk.
And then, the polling on millennials show that they are just. And you just think, what does it take for us to really be the United States?
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It's shocking, and it's frightening to me because I feel like we're moving
backwards.
Way back. When I hear things Jeff Sessions will say from a podium in Washington, and he could have said it in 1960. I mean, it's terrifying to me.
It's very, very terrifying. And I think about, now he's just the deliverer of the message.
Right.
The guy that was elected He's following his marching orders.
Yeah.
That's the reason I tell you, Tom, I tell my viewers all the time, voter education is so critical. You need to know who you're voting for and why you're voting for them and what their positions are. I think that we have the administration that we have now because the last president that we had was, of course, African American, and the Democratic candidate was a female. Ooh.
Yeah.
And then maybe a little bit too liberal, and they thought it would be exactly the same thing, if not worse. So, in this country, those who voted for our current president felt strongly like, I'm losing ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can help me make it up. So, we've got to work through it.
Yeah, it was sort of the worst chapter of demagoguery, and now we've got to live with the results. I am always quick to point out, though, that she did get 3 million more votes. So
she did!
So it isn't like the country is just gone off a cliff.
Right.
It's just,
Electoral
rules of the game.
college, exactly. Those are the rules. That's what we have to live by. And so, Tom, before we wrap up, I want people to know where they can find the Smart City blog. Share that with them because it's one they need to read.
I appreciate it, Deidre. It's www.smartcitymemphis.com. Also, have a Facebook page where we post every one of the Smart City blog posts, but also articles, usually not more than one a day, that sort of interest us and speak to the issues that we're talking about. I hadn't done that today, but I was, to the point of what we were talking about, I was thinking about posting the article that you see where I think it was the fourth great-great-great-grandson of Robert E. Lee resigned from his church as a pastor.
Did? Oh, my, I didn't see that
because of the
one.
backlash for him standing against racism. And so the battle goes on, but it's a battle worth having.
And you know what? He's going to find a church that is going to be embrace him and he is going to be taken care of.
I can't imagine.
It was one of the shows recently. Last week I think he was on, where he talked about how we need to come together and that Robert E. Lee's great-great-great-grandson. So we've got some work to do, Tom. We really have some work to do.
And to that point, we have some very, very impressive and strong ministerial leadership in this city in the right direction.
And they're working
from
on
all
it.
faiths and all races, and it's really encouraging.
I'm very, very encouraged. So, Tom, you are welcome to come back on Dialogue with Deidre anytime. Just let me know when you want to come back, okay?
I appreciate it, Deidre. It's always fun.
Always fun. Tom Jones in the studio talking about the Smart City Memphis blog. Couple of things I just want to make you aware of that's going on this week that you may, and it's all free, open to the public, that you might want to take advantage of, is Preston Lauterbach is going to be speaking, and it is a part of Larry Robinson and the Housing and Community Development and Memphis Heritage Trail are putting this luncheon on, and it's going to be this Friday, and it starts, I believe, at 11:30. And it's going to be at the Paradise Event Center, 645 East Georgia Avenue. But I'm going to tell you to go to the Memphis Heritage Trail Facebook page, and you have to have a ticket because we need to make sure that we have room for everybody. So go ahead and get your ticket now, but it is free, and you're going to want to get an update on what's going on with Memphis Heritage Trail. And then Preston is the author of Beale Street Dynasty and the Chitlin Circuit. So he'll be there, and it'll be great to learn about what else is going on in the Memphis Heritage Trail. And then on this Saturday, which is Southern Heritage Weekend, Jackson State grad in the house. Sorry about that, Tennessee State. I know that we're going to have a great game this weekend, but before you go to the game, the NAACP Memphis branch is having a health care community discussion. We're going to be talking about the Affordable Care Act and what they're trying to do at the federal level and what we need to do at the state level. And that's going to be this Saturday, September 9th, from 11 o'clock until 1 o'clock at the National Civil Rights Museum. And if you are looking for more information, you can go to the NAACP Memphis Facebook page or to the NAACP Memphis website. And I think you need a ticket to get into that event too, but it's free. And we will definitely have refreshments. So I hope to see you at one or both of the events this week. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on next Monday. You've been watching Dialogue with Deidre, and thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.